Well, hey there, church. It's so great to be with you here again. At the end of our time together, we're going to be celebrating communion. So maybe you want to pause this right now and get yourself some crackers out of the pantry or some water and to be able to experience communion with us later at the end of our time here together. A quick look at Instagram, and you can find 7.5 million posts related to this idea and concept living your best life. Now, these range from fashion to travel, but they also include things that are funny, which always gets my attention. So, for instance, you have this one here with the fries when, oh, you said exercise. I thought you meant I'd like to have extra fries. Or this one here with the dog drinking the puppuccino that's there at Starbucks. That's a dog that's living its best life. No doubt about that. And this one here makes me laugh where somebody orders a coffee at a coffee shop and he said, hey, my name is Mark with a C. And he receives this cup and he's living his best life. Living your best life has been a popular trend for several years, and it can be related to highlights of our lives, but it also, people use it to describe ways that they try to cope with difficult circumstances while trying to control those controllables, which you find out there's not very many of, and you're just trying to make the best of a tough situation. Just recently, I was talking to my son, Ben, and he was telling us that he bought brand new pencils to enjoy in order to keep him from spending unnecessary money on a new iPad. He was living his best life. Now, sometimes when we look at the world that we live in, for many of us, things feel really out of control. And the vast changes that we're experiencing economically, culturally, technologically, man, it could leave us feeling really uncertain of our future. And when seasons and times like this happen, followers of Jesus have always had a promise to hold on to. It's not a promise that we make for ourselves. It's a promise that Jesus made when he told his followers that he will come back again. John records this time that Jesus said that in John 14:1. It says, don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me, Jesus says. I'm going to prepare a place for you. If I go away and prepare a place for you, here it is, I will come again, and I will take you to myself so that where I am, there you may be also. This promise was reiterated just 6 weeks later at Jesus' ascension after his resurrection. Once he ascended to heaven, the angels appeared and told his followers, men of Galilee, they said, why are you standing here staring into heaven? Jesus has been taken from you into heaven, but someday he will return from heaven in the same way that you saw him go. Now, this isn't just some ethereal doctrine that has no application to our life. It's a reality that we cling to, especially when things in our life are beyond our control. It's also an anchor of stability whenever we feel like everything in our lives are slipping away. Here's an important thing to remember. There is never any panic in heaven, only plans. And the plan is he's going to come again. So, no matter what the circumstances in your life are, whether it's the terrifying doctor's visit, or the foreboding walk to the dean's office, or the bills in the mail that you're afraid to open, the marriage that feels like it's hanging by a thread, you name it, in the midst of the peril of living, you can still live your best life. Now, nobody understood this more than the people and the followers of Jesus at Thessalonica, Greece. Now, we find their origin story in Acts 17. And what we can know and what we understand and scholars tell us is that Thessalonica was a large city during its time, especially during the writings of Paul to this church. There was at least 200,000 people in the city, which made it a remarkably large city. Even by today's standards, 200,000 people in a city makes it a large city. It was also a Roman capital of a region of the empire. It had incredible power and influence. It had a thriving economy. It was the cultural center of its time. And what's really interesting is that this city still stands today, which is kind of unique to a lot of these cities that we read about in the New Testament. This one still stands today. It's called Salonika, or Salonika, they call it. And you could see that there's all these buildings, and it's a large city. It has grown even over the centuries. Well, Paul and Silas entered this city and preached at the synagogue for 3 weeks telling the Jews of Jesus. This was kind of how Paul operated every time he went into a city to try to plant a new church. He talked all about Jesus, his life, his crucifixion and resurrection, and the fact that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised one that the Jews had been praying for and hoping for and wishing for so many years. And some of his message was really well received because a church was literally birthed out of this. But much of it was not well received. And when I say not well received, it was not well received. We read this in Acts 17:5. It says, "But some of the Jews were jealous, so they gathered some troublemakers from the marketplace to form a mob and start a riot." So this city literally started to riot. They attacked the home of Jason. Jason was one of the early church members, searching for Paul and Silas. And not finding them there, they dragged out Jason and some of the other believers instead, and they took them before the city council. "Paul and Silas have caused trouble all over the world," they shouted, "and now they're disturbing our city too." And what eventually happened was that Jason and other believers were accused of sedition and treason because they believed that Jesus was their king. That's what Christianity taught and still teaches today, that Jesus is our king, that he is our Lord, that we're a part of this invisible kingdom, and it's much greater and much bigger than, and much more important even than even our physical kingdoms that we see in this world. Well, they were forced to post bond. Paul and Silas were hurried out of town under cover of darkness. And many historians and scholars believe that those who posted bond, Jason and his believers, were later martyred for their faith because Rome would not tolerate somebody worshiping or following another king, invisible or not. So this was a church living in perilous circumstances. And in all of the frenzy, Paul ended up in another area of Greece wondering, how did this small church fare? How did they do? There was no word. It wasn't like you could just reach out and text somebody like you can today. And he tried to make it back several times to Thessalonica, but he couldn't. But finally, he was able to send his protege, Timothy. And Timothy came back with a real encouraging report that the church was flourishing. It was growing. Yet it wasn't without its problems. There was lots of discouragement and confusion as to why they suffered so much. They were under such strong persecution. But in the midst of those trying circumstances, what we learned is that this church was living its best life. These followers of Jesus, no matter what their circumstances, were living their best life. So, Paul writes a small letter to them, and in the New Testament, we call it 1 Thessalonians. And he writes this letter to encourage them and strengthen them in their walk with God, emphasizing the promise of the second coming of Jesus and how we're to live our lives in light of that reality. So together, we're going to take a journey throughout this book over the next few weeks. And it's my desire that you'll come out of this encouraged and strengthened as well with the capacity to live your best life with Jesus as your king, no matter what life throws at you. So perhaps even right now, you're encouraged by the life and reputation of this church that came before us, their resiliency and strength in the midst of their hurt and confusion. And although far from perfect, they had an incredible reputation, which begs the question, what do you want to be known for? I mean, what do you want to be known for in your home with your family or at school or work? What do you want to be known for if you lead people? Or even if as a boyfriend or a girlfriend, what do you want people to say about you? We should consider what we want to be known for because it really is the values in which we live our life. And if people were to write a book or an article on us, what would they say? But we have to, in order to know what we want to be known for, we have to start with, what am I currently known for? What is it today? What would people say today? Because today we all have our own reputations. And when people see your name or see your face as you turn the corner, they all have a feeling. They all have thoughts that come into their mind. I mean, at work and at school, are you known for something? Are you known for maybe being on time or always being late or the one who complains all the time or the funny person or the one who sees the bright side? What today are you known for? Thessalonian people were known for three things that I think may begin to help us live our best life today. And interestingly, there's nothing here related to ambition and striving, money and status or security, things that we chase and hope that brings us peace. Instead, Paul writes this in verse 3. We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. This church, these people, were known for their faith, hope, and love. These are our three cardinal virtues of the Christian faith. Faith is directed toward God. It rests in the past of what Jesus has done for us. Love is directed toward others. It's what we represent day to day. It really is the evidence of our changed lives with Jesus. Hope is directed toward our future. It looks forward and it helps us to endure through difficult circumstances because it's based on the promise of seeing Jesus again. Now, sometimes we're known more today for our politics or maybe for our hobbies or sports teams, but wouldn't it be better to be known for our faith, love, and hope? Man, they were known for their faith that was put into action. It's hard for our faith to be strong if it's never tested. And some of us have had our faith tested. We know what that looks like. For some of us, we've battled cancer, lost loved ones. We've had families wrecked by abuse or addictions. Never mind unemployment, financial difficulties, broken friendships, just the stuff of life. Honestly, I wish no one had to suffer. I wish nobody had to experience loss in their life. But unfortunately, we all live in a broken world, and whether we're followers of Jesus or not, we're not exempt of the brokenness. So each day, we have a choice. We can be light to those around us as we model faith, even when it doesn't make sense for us sometimes. Believe that you've not been abandoned by God, that God can redeem even the toughest of circumstances. He can show you his faithfulness and goodness even in the darkest times of our life. Or we can live like practical atheists, believing in God, but then acting and living our life as if he doesn't exist. One of the toughest ways to put our faith into action is by offering forgiveness, right? Hurting is natural. Forgiveness, though, that's supernatural. It's a miracle every time someone forgives. And because of God's forgiveness toward us, we have the capacity through him to forgive others as well. To leave a life worn down by bitterness and resentment, and to start a life of peace and joy. It's not easy. It's a process, and it's a work that requires faith in God's goodness and in his holiness. And that is faith put into action. So a good question to ask maybe, if we want to make faith put into action one of our virtues, here's the question. Is there anything I'm doing produced by faith today? You could do a lot of stuff during a day, but is any of it produced by faith? That's a great question to ask if you want to be known for your faith. Now, not only faith in action, but this church here at Thessalonica was known also for their labor of love. Remember that? So this context relates to when it talks about labor as pressing into, breaking a sweat, laborious toil and hardship. Loving people is sometimes really hard. Maybe when some of us hear this, there's a family member who comes to mind that we've struggled with to get along with. Or maybe it's a job that we're frustrated in because of the coworkers that we deal with are just kind of driving us crazy, or there's unrealistic demands from our bosses, and we really just kind of think, man, I don't know if I even like this person anymore. Maybe for you, you're a young mom or dad, and it's a cranky child where the terrible two started when they were 1, and in a couple of weeks they're going on 4, and you're like, will this ever end? Sometimes love's amazing, though, especially when it's reciprocated. But some people are really easy to love, but other times, man, love is sacrificing. Love is difficult. And ultimately, like faith in action, it is a choice that we make every day. Am I known for my love? Do people say, hey, that's a man or that's a woman who loves people? So a question that we could ask ourselves is this: what does love require of me today? And then with that question, it can bring insight into our lives, and we can be a person of love. Finally, the church was known for their enduring hope, and these men and women, remember, severely persecuted for their faith. Paul said that they were experiencing what the church in Jerusalem had experienced, which we know today was martyrdom, families torn apart, ostracized from society where it was difficult to make a living economically. So you may not be enduring persecution to that degree, but we all face difficulty throughout our days. And many times these difficulties and trials, they pile up because chances are we're not just dealing with one of these things. Rather, it's several at the same time. For instance, the stove breaks. But at the same time, your child's having difficulty with somebody at school and you're waiting for test results to come back from the doctor. And all of that piles up. And it brings a lot of stress into our lives. We run into trouble, though, when we tie our hope into outcomes. When we start saying, man, if only the stove would work, then my life would be so much easier. If only this problem at school is solved or the test comes back negative, then, God will be good. Then my life will be good. But as believers of Jesus and as followers of Him, one of the greatest things we could do is to decouple our hope from outcomes and instead weld our hope to Jesus. And this is what Paul was urging these Christians to do, because that persecution was not going to go away anytime soon. Matter of fact, he says in verse 10, they speak of how you're looking forward to the coming of God's Son from heaven, Jesus. That's where their focus was, whom God raised from the dead. Here's the thing, guys. Hope and hardship collaborate in your lives for helping you live your best life. Hope lives in the presence of suffering and crisis. And here's the good news. Your soul can awaken with only a microscopic presence of hope. And it's why we need Jesus. It's why we need to stay together as followers and share our lives together. It's no good to go into isolation, to be by ourselves. And just like faith and love, hope is a choice we make. It's an outlook, it's a posture of the soul. It's not just for dark times, though. It's for all of our times of life. So a good question to ask is, where's my hope found today? Is my hope tied to outcomes, or is my hope tied to Jesus? Because hope is a person, and hope has a name, and His name is Jesus. It's why we're called to take time to remember our faith that's founded on Jesus' work, His life, His death, His resurrection. We remember that we love because Jesus first loved us, that while we were still sinners, He died for us. And we remember that our hope is in the reality of a resurrected Jesus' promised return. So would you join me in communion at this time? Paul writes this: on the night when Jesus was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took some bread and He gave thanks to God for it. Then He broke it in pieces and He said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, He took the cup of wine after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant between God and His people. It's an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it." And then He closes with something so important. He says, "For every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are announcing the Lord's death. You are remembering what He's done until He comes again." Every time we receive communion, we remember the promise that Jesus is coming again, and in that He will make all things new. So there's something in the cross that's transforming, guys. There's something in the cross that's changing, that's soul expanding, that's perspective shifting, and even life-giving. So as we follow Jesus these days, may we, like the church of Thessalonica, be a people known for our faith, our hope, and our love.